welcome back to Crimson Cast. Galen Clavio here. It is Halloween. Happy Halloween, everybody. Hopefully you're getting a chance post-candy haul or party or whatever you did on Halloween to get a chance to listen to this. Or maybe you're listening to it while you're trick-or-treating. Or maybe you're just listening to it as you get ready for the game because you're actually listening to it on November 1st. Either way, whether you're watching, whether you're listening, I appreciate you folks. It's great to have you joining us once again as we get ready for another big game week for IU football. They travel to Maryland. They enter the final third of the regular season schedule, take on the Terrapins, and the train hopefully just keeps a rolling here for Indiana. We're going to talk about the matchup with stats courtesy of our good friend Taylor Lehman from Bite Sized Bison, as well as some thoughts of my own about what the numbers mean. And this will be a relatively short episode, but I wanted to hit this before I got on the road. I'm heading out to D.C. Early flight. Going to go out there, meeting up with some folks. Going to go watch the game. Never been to Maryland's stadium or campus. So I'm getting to cross that off the list, which it's been nice as I've been making all these travels all over Big Ten country with IU football. I've been able to cross quite a few of them off the list. So before we get started, just a quick reminder, we're brought to you by Homefield Apparel, your place to go for the finest in college fashions, the softest fabrics, the coolest designs. And, well, they had a really cool one that they released today. I don't know if you all saw this, but Homefield launching a new collection, the Blackout Hats collection. Monochromatic logos from a bunch of different teams, like some awesome looking stuff. I'm going to pop this up actually on screen if you're watching on YouTube. Blackout snapbacks. You can see them right there. You got right on the front page here, we got UConn, UCLA, we got Penn State, we got Ohio State, Michigan State, a little bit of everything here. And of course, the IU logo, Blackout snapback. This is a really cool looking design. It is the IU trident in black on black. I know black's not one of our colors, but we dabble in it every once in a while. I think that's perfectly fine. If you are interested in this, and you should be, head over to homefieldapparel.com. Use the code HOME23. Get 15% off your first order. And it's just one of the many things that Homefield has been revealing here as of late. They continue to release new product. They had a new Coastal Carolina set that they released earlier this week. Just great stuff from the good brand. So we should call them the great brand, actually. I think that they've elevated themselves over time. Anyway, homefieldapparel.com, proud sponsor of the Back Home Network. Also, just a reminder, folks, we are on Substack, crimsoncast.substack.com. Had some new subscribers over the last 2 weeks. Appreciate that. There is, if you're watching this pod, there's a special edition extra video that I added to the Substack only. So only Substack paid subscribers get that. $5 a month, $50 a year. Helps to support the podcast. We give you some extra content to go alongside it. You can also subscribe just for free and get content from the Back Home Network sent to you about twice a week in your email. We try not to be obtrusive, but we try to keep you folks informed. So be sure to subscribe, crimsoncast.substack.com. We would love to have you as a part of the community. All right, without further ado, let's dive into the statistical breakdown of Indiana versus Maryland. Let's set the scene first and foremost. Indiana 8-0 on the season as they come off an absolute bloodletting of the UCLA Bruins. That game was supposed to be close. It was not. It was 56-6. And Indiana didn't even run the score up. I mean, Fernando Mendoza's last snap happened with 4 minutes left in the third quarter, and UCLA just really couldn't do anything. I think they kicked a late field goal. Indiana scored a late touchdown. It was a domination by a team that continues to play like a dominant, not just playoff team, but a team that is an elite contender for the national championship. And they come into this game against a better team. Maryland is not nearly as down in the rankings from a statistical perspective as the UCLA Bruins were or the Michigan State Spartans. This is a solid upper third, maybe, between upper third and upper half team within the power conferences in college football, and a team that started off the season with quite a bit of promise. This was a team that won very handily their first 4 games. Well, 3 of the 4 games they won handily. They beat Florida Atlantic, not a great team, but they won 39-7. They beat Northern Illinois at home 20-9. They beat Towson, who's an FCS team, by a pretty significant margin. And then they went to Wisconsin, who I will remind everybody is not good this year officially. And they won that game 27-10. But they're on a 3-game slide. Now, none of the 3 games has been a blowout. They've been close losses, but they have still been losses. 24-20 loss at home to Washington, a 34-31 loss at home to Nebraska, and then they went on the road 2 weeks ago and lost at UCLA 20-17. So they had a bye, and so they've had a week to rest, to plan things, and to get ready for this Indiana game, which really does look like, this game and the game at home against Michigan and the game at home against Michigan State to close the season. These are all games that they've got to have circled on their calendar at this point, because this is a Maryland team that, frankly, is still very much in contention for not just a bowl, but maybe a very decent bowl. It's just going to depend on how they're able to close things out. They could also miss the postseason entirely, as they don't have the easiest schedule down the stretch. Indiana at home, at Rutgers, at Illinois, Michigan at home, and then a game against Michigan State, the final game of the season. So they come into this Indiana game looking to do some things that they haven't been able to do. And I think the big one for Maryland is score. They've only averaged about 28 points a game so far on the season. Their defense has been pretty good overall. I mean, you go back and look at the games that they played, even in this losing streak. They hold Washington, who's a very good offense, to 24 points. They hold UCLA, who has offensive firepower, although they didn't show it last week, to 20 points. And then Nebraska, even though they let up 34 points to Nebraska, the Maryland's defense scored on a pick 6. And, they're a defense that's played fairly decently overall through the course of the season. I mean, through those first 4 games of the year, they did not allow more than 17 points in any of them. But Maryland, when you look at the way that their statistics break down, and I'm going to go ahead and call up the sheet, that wonderful sheet that Taylor puts out as part of Bite Sized Bison's paid coverage. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, so for those of you who are watching can get a little bit of a closer look. Let's get this zoomed in a little bit more. There we go. So Indiana comes into this game, and they are a 16-point favorite according to S&P Plus. 84% win probability in this game. The spread is 21.5 last I checked. So there's a bit of a discrepancy, which can be accounted for by a number of things. Probably some bias in terms of where people think the money's going to go. You get a lot of people weirdly now hopping on Indiana as not really a purely public team. And by that, I mean people that will bet on Indiana despite not having a rooting interest necessarily, who just think that they're a good play overall and maybe aren't looking that closely at it. But Indiana getting the benefit of the doubt to some degree here within the wagers that are being placed. That's why the line is where it is. This is not projected to be necessarily a close game, but I think it's a game that could be a bit of a, I hate to say trap game, because Curt Cignetti and his staff have done such a good job of avoiding trap games as a thing. They've really been able to get their team fired up, focused, and taking their opponent seriously. There's some really interesting things to keep an eye on in this game. I think the biggest and most fascinating elements are Indiana coming in number 1 overall in S&P Plus. A lot of that was because of the domination that they had statistically last week against UCLA. Their defense continues to be incredible, 2nd in the country in S&P Plus, and then 3rd in the country in FEI. Their offense is also amazing, 6th in the country. And when you look at what Indiana's done the best, they gain a ton of yards, almost 500 yards a game. They've scoring 45.4 points a game, which is 3rd most in the country. They don't turn the ball over. They've only turned the ball over 5 times. And they've managed over the course of the season to do all of that while simultaneously not allowing very many points scored at all. They're only allowing 11 points a game. That's 3rd in the country. And they're only allowing 243 yards a game. That's 7th in the country. Let's start with Indiana's offense versus Maryland's defense, because when you look at Maryland, their strength is their defense right now. 17th in S&P Plus in defense, and that's nothing to sneeze at. As I was mentioning, that is very much a thing that Maryland has tried to build around this season, and they've done a good job. They've forced turnovers. They're 6th in the country in turnovers forced, and in FEI they're 11th defensively overall, and a lot of that is down to the fact that they just haven't allowed many points throughout the course of this season. You break down the matchup more specifically, Maryland's done a great job of limiting EPA per play. So again, EPA, expected points added per play, the higher the number, the better your offense is in terms of how it's moving the ball. And, Maryland's just done a very good job of figuring that out. And Indiana's been good. EPA per play has not been as high as you would like to see. Indiana has gotten a lot of success in other spots offensively. A lot of that has been through the passing game and through their ability to convert. Their conversion rate is 4th in the country. They're getting great push off of their offensive line. They're having amazing success on 3rd down. That's going to be a really fascinating one because Indiana, they haven't minded getting into 3rd down positions because they've been able to convert them. And that, ironically, maybe not ironically, but coincidentally is perhaps the better way of putting it, that's the one thing you could look at on Maryland's defense and say, well, you're pretty mid at that. They do not do a good job of getting opponents off the field on 3rd down. Where Maryland has really stood up defensively is they've been very good against the run. And this is going to be interesting because we know Indiana likes to run the ball, particularly on the road. They did it, they managed to do a lot of running, effective running in several games so far this season. And they like to start with that. But that is the strength of the Maryland defense. And so I think that's the first thing to be keeping an eye on within this game. What is Indiana's offense able to do against Maryland's defense in terms of running the ball? So that's where, again, you've got Roman Hemby, who's going to have a little bit extra in the tank, I'm guessing, for this game because, of course, Roman Hemby was at Maryland the last few years, had a couple of 100-yard rushing games for Maryland against Indiana. He will certainly be ready and interested in having a big statistical game. But you've also got Kalon Black. You've also got Kobe Martin. You've also got Fernando Mendoza. And Indiana's rushing success, while it isn't as stellar as their passing success has still been top 20 in the country. So this is strength versus strength. And I think Indiana here, the thing for them is they need to be patient. They need to try to bank on field position, getting them in good spots, and then they need to be methodical with moving the ball down the field. We know, as we've talked about it many times on this show, explosion rate and explosive plays have not been the forte of IU so far. They've had a lot of near explosive plays, as you've heard Taylor talk about on the show, but they've managed to move the ball very consistently despite the lack of explosive plays. So I do think one of the things to keep an eye on, we saw Indiana with much better success with explosive plays against UCLA. Can they exploit a Maryland secondary that may not be quite up to the task and also really hasn't faced offenses quite as efficient or quite as good as Indiana at converting? But this is really, I think, going to be one of the big keys because I think the key for Indiana in this game is to get some separation early against Maryland. And by separation, I mean point separation. Can you get a 14-point lead by the midway point of the second quarter? Because if you can do that, you put a ton of pressure on Maryland's offense. We saw Maryland have some pretty successful wrinkles defensively in the game that Indiana played against them last year in Memorial Stadium. Many people remember that game as being a game where we were a little bit not skeptical, but a little concerned still because we hadn't seen Indiana. We'd seen them beat up on UCLA on the road, but we hadn't seen them win against a team that we figured was pretty good. And last year, the idea, I think, was Maryland was projected to be at least somewhat decent. They had the personnel and they had certainly had Indiana's number at various times in previous years. I mean, the previous year, Indiana lost at Maryland 44-17. And, that was a game where Indiana just had trouble doing anything offensively. And that first half last year, it was a nip and tuck game to some degree. Indiana scored, and then Billy Edwards threw a 33-yard touchdown pass, and then Indiana scores again, and then Maryland scores. And they just went back and, essentially traded touchdowns all the way up until the middle part of the third quarter. And as many of you recall, Roman Hemby rips off a 75-yard run on a drive in the third quarter, and it was like, uh-oh, like, is Indiana in trouble? Now, from that point, Indiana outscored Maryland. What was it? It was 21-21 at that point. Indiana outscores them to the point where it's 42-28 by the end of that game. So Indiana really laid it on there, scored 3 consecutive touchdowns after that touchdown that Maryland scored. Anytime you can outscore a team 21-7 down the stretch, you're doing pretty well. But Indiana's obviously going to want to avoid that scenario. And Indiana, I just think, is better overall this year than they were last year. And Maryland, I don't know if they're better or worse at this point. Maryland last year ended up finishing the season 4-8. I think they're probably better. But, at that point in the season last year, Maryland looked like decent value. They had won at Virginia. They'd had a close loss to a Michigan State team. This was a Maryland team that ended up beating USC for their 4th win of the year. And at that point, they were 4-3, and then they lost their last 5 games. So, it's an interesting thing, because a lot of where Maryland fans' consternation has come in has been with this idea that they start strong and then they fade pretty badly as the season goes along. Obviously, they're going to want to try to address that in this game, because if they lose this game, suddenly it starts to feel like things are piling up and they've lost 4 in a row. But this is where, going back to my original point, Maryland's defense is going to have to lead the way for them. And conversely, Indiana's offense is going to need to score points. It's not a whole lot different, frankly, from what we said in the Oregon game, where it's like Indiana's offense is going to have to score. You can't just rely on your defense to get the job done. And the thing is, when I look at this matchup, I think Maryland's defense is going to have to be reckoned with. I think they're going to have some wrinkles that are going to perhaps create some problems for Indiana. I'm curious to see what they try to take away. I do say that if they just try to stop Indiana in the running attack, they're going to get shredded, likely, by Fernando Mendoza and this core of receivers. Indiana has, on every given play, 4 legitimate targets to catch the ball. And I don't know that Maryland can do that while simultaneously being in a position where they're stopping the run to the level that they have. So, we'll see what Maryland can do. I also think Maryland's going to have to force some turnovers. They did that last year, and that was really what kept them in that game against Indiana. Curtis Rourke had 2 interceptions and, ultimately kind of put a cap on what Indiana could really do offensively in the first half. They cleaned that up in the second half. And even though, think about it, last year, Indiana turned the ball over 4 times in that game. Maryland didn't turn over any, and Maryland still lost by 14 points. Got outgained by 109 yards, got out first downed by 9. So Indiana shot themselves in the foot last year, and it still didn't matter that much. But that game was in Memorial Stadium and not on the road. Looking at the other side of the ball, Indiana's defense against Maryland's offense. This is not a Maryland offense that has played particularly well. 70th overall in FPI, and they have almost every statistical category offensively, they have just looked very, very bad so far this season. EPA per play is 120th in the country. That's real bad. Anything under 80 is like that's real bad territory. They don't have a very successful running game. They don't have a very successful passing game. We talk about Indiana struggling with explosive plays. Maryland is they may be the worst power conference team with explosive plays. They don't get push in their offensive line. They don't do well on early downs. They have done a decent job on third down success, but relatively speaking, this is not a good offensive team at all. They are led by a freshman quarterback, and that has presented some problems, obviously. Malik Washington, only a 59.7% completion percentage, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. They haven't asked him to do a ton. He's an exciting young player. I think he's got a great future, but this is going to be a tall task for him against Brian Haynes' defense. Running the ball, their leading rusher is DeJuan Williams. He's only rushed for 292 yards so far on the season, 3.52 yards per carry average. Nolan Ray, the backup running back. DeJuan Williams is a freshman. Nolan Ray is a sophomore. Nolan Ray is not, he's only averaging 3.84 yards a carry. And then Malik Washington has managed to scramble for about 4 yards a carry. But the running attack here is not a good one for Maryland. In the receiving game, and Taylor pointed this out in his preview, they do spread the ball around a bunch. Shalik Knotts, Octavian Smith Jr., Jaleel Farouk, Dorian Fleming, and DeJuan Williams, all with at least 20 pass catches so far on the season. Knotts is the scoring threat. He's got 5 touchdowns so far, and he's averaging about 16 yards per reception. But it's one of those things where they try to spread it out, but they just haven't asked for a ton out of their passing game, and their passing game has not delivered a ton either. So this is a Maryland team that I think if they have a chance in this game, it's really going to be about limiting what Indiana can do, turning Indiana over, and then as Maryland tries to drive down the field, can they convert drives into touchdowns as opposed to having to settle for field goals? And I think that really sums up the primary points that you would want to hit in this game from a statistical perspective. Ultimately, Indiana needs to take care of the ball, and they've done a great job of that so far. They have turned the ball over 5 times. Maryland's turned the ball over 5 times. But the difference is, Maryland has relied on the 16 turnovers that they've generated so far and having a plus 11 turnover ratio. And that was what they relied on last year to stay in the game against Indiana for as long as they did. Both of these teams are, they like to do what they like to do, would be the way that I would put it. The one of the interesting things I think for Maryland is their pace offensively is pretty fast. I think they're 8th in the country in pace. They try to get the ball snapped about once every 20 seconds. No one's really come up with a great playbook on how to take advantage of what Indiana does. Michigan State probably had the closest thing to the right playbook, which was take as much time off the clock as possible per play. Michigan State really slowed the game down, really tried to keep Indiana from having the ball, with their philosophy being, well, if Indiana doesn't have the ball, they can't score, and that allows us to keep it within striking distance. Now, that really didn't work for them, but it at least kept it closer than the spread indicated, and Michigan State was able to kick a field goal at the end to cover the spread. Maryland going the opposite direction on this, I don't know if it's a great idea for them. If they play at the same pace that they've played at, Indiana might have a bunch of possessions, and that to me feels like it plays directly into Indiana's favor. But again, a lot of this is going to depend on what Indiana decides to do and what wrinkles they can throw out there offensively to try and get Maryland's defense off kilter somewhat. So that's going to be, I think, a really fascinating set of circumstances just to watch it unfold. You never want to take a road game for granted. And, I've talked to some folks who follow the program closely who are a little concerned about this one just because of all of the circumstances that surround it. You've got an 8-0 Indiana team that was number 1 in S&P Plus, number 2 in the polls. College football playoff draw, or not the draw, but the initial projection by the committee is coming up this upcoming Tuesday. It's a team that has had a lot of positive vibes going its way from media and from fans, which feels like the rat poison that Curt Cignetti talks about. You've got a Maryland team that sitting at 4-3 with 2 games on the road really doesn't want to leave it to chance as they go down the stretch for bowl eligibility. You've also got a young team that, sometimes young teams do better in these situations because they don't know better. You've got a lot of key players that are younger that Maryland's going to rely on, particularly on offense. And I am curious to see how they handle this circumstance. This is homecoming. It's a sellout, which is, I believe, not a normal thing at Maryland. Indiana, I guess, has become the homecoming opponent you book to try to make sure that you get people into the stands. This is going to be Maryland's, I'm not going to say it's going to be their Super Bowl. I think that's dumb. But this is going to be Maryland's most important home game probably of the year. It's going to be a lot of focus from the fans. It's going to be probably a noisy atmosphere, or as noisy as it can get. The forecast for tomorrow is going to be breezy. It looks like a high of 61 degrees, and it's going to be windy. 10-mile-an-hour winds with gusts up to 28. That's the forecast right now. Shouldn't rain. So I think overall probably a wash in terms of field conditions. It is those kinds of conditions, though, with potential gusts to 28 miles an hour. Like, that's where you'd like to have the running game up and going. So I think for Indiana, establishing that or figuring out the best way to go about attacking Maryland's defense is going to be interesting. And obviously, I think just for Indiana, the key is defensively make it hard for Maryland to move the ball, make them punt it in disadvantageous positions, keep them in their end of the field. Indiana's defense has done such a great job of doing that throughout the course of this season. And then on the flip side, can you get some sustained drives? Can you get control of the game early where you force Maryland into a situation where they have to try some more risky things on offense, because that plays right into the hands of what Indiana wants to do defensively. Injury-wise, it's unfortunate that Kellen Wyatt is not going to be able to play in this game. He was one of the two primary transfers from Maryland, him and Roman Hemby, and it would have been great to see him be able to go back to that stadium, given as well as he's played. So you're going to need a lot out of Mikhail Kamara. It looks like Aiden Fisher is going to play. Kurt Signetti listed him as probable earlier on in the week. So having him out there, along with Isaiah Jones and Elijah Hardy, the linebackers are likely going to get called upon a lot. One of the things that Taylor brought up in Bite Sized Bison that I thought was a really good point was, Indiana's done such a great job of getting pressure on the quarterback without blitzing. You're going to want to be able to hold the linebackers in reserve, hold the secondary in reserve, not commit a bunch of players to trying to rush Malik Washington, because you want to make life hard on Malik Washington and then drive home pressure using your defensive front. So can you get the same kind of pressure from Tyreek Tucker and from Mario Andino, and especially from Mikhail Kamara, that you've seen over the course of the last few games? And can you get Mikhail Kamara some sacks? Can you get him some TFLs? Can you get him into the backfield? Maryland's offensive line, not great. This is an offensive line that has struggled, frankly, especially the left side of the offensive line. Retrell Perry, one of the lowest graded offensive linemen according to PFF. And, Isaiah Wright also on that left side, not highly graded at all. They do have a very good right tackle in Alan Herron. They have a good center in Michael Hershey, at least according to the grades. But, what is going to be fascinating about this, and I'm curious how Brian Haynes decides to go about attacking this. This is a defense, or is an offensive line for Maryland that's real bad in run blocking. Like, this is outside of the right tackle. This is not a team that has run blocked well. And I think you can see why when you go back and think about those stats that I talked about earlier in terms of the running totals that they've managed to accrue. It has not been very many. So could be some feast time, not just for the front seven as far as the running game's concerned, but it also is going to put a lot of pressure on Malik Washington to make throws. And given the very difficult time most quarterbacks have had in dealing with this zone coverage that Indiana likes to run in their secondary, they do such a great job of disguising coverages. They do such a great job of rotating guys. That would be tough for a junior or senior quarterback to throw against, let alone a freshman in Malik Washington, who, again, he's played fine. He's exciting. Indiana's going to make you think. And if Indiana can get some pressure on him while making him think, that's where I think things could go really wrong for Maryland. So I hate to take road games for granted. I was talking with somebody earlier on this week, and I expressed, they were expressing a lot of concerns about, okay, is this game a look ahead game? You got the Penn State game the next week. You got the whole rest of the season. I felt this way last year in almost the exact same spot when Indiana traveled to Michigan State. I was worried about that game. I was worried about Aiden Childs, and I was worried about the fact that, Michigan State has really good skill players. And I was worried about Indiana coming out flat, especially after having come off two big wins at home against Nebraska and Washington. And Indiana did kind of come out flat. They did not play well at all in that first quarter against Michigan State last year, and then they just smushed them in the last three quarters. So I think this might be a similar kind of thing. I think Maryland's going to throw the kitchen sink at Indiana early, try to gum up the works a little bit. I think Indiana will stabilize. This is a team that seems to know what it's doing, seems to have a head on its shoulders that is very sober and very much focused on what's the next task in front of us. And I just think that Indiana's defense is going to be real hard for Maryland to do a lot against. And as long as Indiana can limit their own turnovers offensively and can move the ball, I like Indiana's chances not just to win in this game, but to win pretty convincingly. I hate picking, 20-plus point covers on the road. So I'm going to say maybe slightly less than that, in part because I think Indiana may take their foot off the gas just slightly, given that this is the time of year where you start to accrue some injuries. Indiana playing 3 weeks in a row here and has to play again next week. So I am going to go with a score prediction of Indiana 35 and Maryland 17. I think this will be probably, I'll say, like a 17-10 game at half. Might be a bit closer, get some people excited, and then Indiana opens it up in the second half as they really wear down this Maryland offense with the defense, and that put their own offense in good spots, and Indiana's able to score some points down the stretch. So that's my pick, 35-17. Workmanlike effort from Indiana, another business trip, so to speak, as they head on the road and hopefully pick up another victory as they march towards the conclusion of the regular season. We'll see what that has in store for the Hoosiers. Anyway, that'll wrap up this edition of Crimson Cast. Little programming note for those of you who I know will be waiting for the post-game show, which we always do on Sundays. We will do it on Sunday this time. No podcasting from the press box like I did at Iowa. It'll be a bit later because I got to fly back. So I would say probably around the time the AP poll drops, maybe 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. Check us out on X or subscribe on YouTube, and you'll get a notification when we get the live up and running. We'd love to have you folks join us, but we'll do another, I think, likely live show unless circumstances change. If they change, I will try to let you folks know. But one way or another, Sunday afternoon, we'll have the post-game wrap-up show. We'll talk about everything that happened and hopefully have some good things to talk about. So anyway, for those of you who are making the trip, I will try to say hi. For those who are not making the trip, we will bring the spirit of IU with us as we cheer on the Hoosiers as they take on Maryland. That'll wrap it up here. My thanks again to Taylor Lehman from Bite Sized Bison for the amazing work he does statistically. Please go subscribe to Bite Sized Bison, and you won't regret it as Indiana goes down the home stretch here. I'm Galen Clavio. This is Crimson Cast. We'll catch you folks on the flip side. Stay never daunted. So long, everybody.